time. Can you hear me? I'm going to start right on time because it's so darn cold out. I really don't want you here any later than you have to be. And if anybody wants to move forward, there's just a few of us, and we can be an intimate little group here. I'm Kathy Grinzinger. I'm the city manager for the city of Mount Pleasant. And with us are several staff people. Most of you will have, if you have not already, worked with them. And I think there are only about 9 or so new board members. This is our first year of trying to do an overall kind of umbrella training for our new appointed board and commission members. So we appreciate you being our guinea pig class. And if you want to give us feedback when we're done, we would certainly appreciate it, because we'd like to do this every year so that we give our board and commission appointees kind of a head start. We're going to talk about 3 things this evening. I'm going to talk to you about the overall structure of the city, the form of government, and how the citizen volunteer boards and commissions fit into that. Kathy Ling, who is the mayor of the city of Mount Pleasant this year, is going to talk to you about the ethics policy. The city commission passed an ethics policy, and now all appointed boards and commission members are subject to that policy. Jeremy Howard, who is the city clerk, is going to talk to you about Robert's Rules of Order and how to conduct a professional meeting to sort of help you get into that. And then those of you who would like can sit down and meet with your staff liaison. As I said, every board and commission has a staff liaison. You can talk to that person, get a little bit better handle on how your packets are put together, what rules and regulations you might be subject to, and what the issues are on your meeting. I don't have a PowerPoint. So if you're reading behind me, you're in the wrong subject matter. And as I said, I want to talk to you just a little bit about the form and structure of the government of the city of Mount Pleasant. Now, the city of Mount Pleasant is a council manager form of government. There are generally 3 kinds of governmental structures in Michigan that we're familiar with. Most everyone is familiar with a strong mayor. Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, those are strong mayor cities. The majority of the rest of us in Michigan follow the council manager form. There is also a weak mayor form, and then there's a couple of little villages that are still following the form of government that they used to have as a township, but they're so few that they don't kind of rise up in the pie chart. The structure, the council manager form or the strong mayor form or whatever that is a conscious decision that's made by the people of a community. It's generally or always outfitted in the charter. Every city or village must have a charter. The state requires it. And cities and villages and townships and counties are all creatures of the state in Michigan as put forth by the Michigan Constitution. In a strong mayor form, there are 2 primary leaders. The mayor, who is elected independently by the folks, and that person generally has a lot of independent power. They appoint and hire the department heads generally. A lot of the folks underneath them might go through the civil service system. The other primary leader is the president of the council. The strong mayor form follows the federal system, basically. It's a balance of power kind of structure, and often leads to some really divisive warring between the president of the council, who has policy power, and the mayor, who has the same level of administrative power. And it is not the form that the city of Mount Pleasant residents determined to follow for themselves. Over the last 2 charters that the city of Mount Pleasant has had, they have called themselves a council manager form. The council manager form actually was created specifically in the early 20th century. It was not an accidental form of government and is probably the only completely unique form of government created by the Americas and has now spread to just about every country in the world. The council manager form was created under, those of you who remember your Public Policy 101 from college. It was created under the Progressive Reform Movement in the early 1900s, which was a direct response to all of the ickiness that was going on around the country. It was a response to the spoils system that existed, the corruption that was often found in cities like New York and Boston, and it was it came out of an organization that was formed called the National League of Cities around that same time. The second thing that was happening in this country at the same time was a thing called the scientific management movement, and it was a whole bunch of thinkers who got together and decided that if people just operated with efficient processes, things would go better. That drove the formation of corporate models as businesses got bigger and formed corporations. Those two things came together and created the council manager form of government, which if you look at the organizational chart, looks a lot like a corporation. There is a board of directors that is the city commission or the city council, whatever you want to call them. They are given the ultimate legislative authority rests with that body, and they're elected directly by the people. That body hires a professional manager and shifts responsibility for running the public corporation, for running the government's day-to-day operations to the city manager. As I said, all the legislative and political leadership rests with the elected officials. The mayor can be elected from within or independently, depending on what the charter talks about. They are the folks that establish policy and are assumed to always be sensitive to the to the needs and wants of the citizen as their first priority. They pass the legislative matters, they approve the budget, they authorize appropriation, they establish the vision for the community, and they operate like that big board of directors. As a body, they hire this professional manager. The manager in the council manager form reports to the body in entirety. The manager does not report to just the mayor or a subsection or a commission or a subcommittee. They can only be hired by majority vote of the commission, and they can only be fired by a majority vote of the commission. Generally, the charter gives broad authorities to the manager in this kind of a form. They are responsible for hiring, recruiting, supervising all of the employees. They administer the programs and the projects. They propose the budget. They serve as the chief advisor to the council. They provide objective information. But the first job of the manager in a council manager form is to carry out the policy directives of the council in a way that assures that the entire community is being served efficiently and effectively. Now, the primary advantages in a council manager form is that it combines a strong political, nonpartisan leadership in most cases with a strong managerial experience of someone who is trained specifically to administer larger systems. It is not a balance of power. It doesn't require two sides to fight against each other and balance out the victories. It is a true representative form where all the policy power is concentrated in one place and the administrative responsibility is concentrating in another place, but it is definitely a shared construct where the manager and the primary appointees working under the policy directives of the council form a leadership team that goes in a singular direction. In Mount Pleasant and in most communities like this, the city commission and the professional management team are assisted and advised by a number of volunteer boards and commission, hence the reason for you to be here. In Mount Pleasant, there are 20 of these boards. Each of those boards has a singular mission. It's to keep the city of Mount Pleasant and its functions healthy and prosperous. but each of the boards and commission has a different piece of that responsibility. And it's certainly created, I think, by the framers of our charter to make sure that the regular citizen had a great deal of input into how programs were put together and how the whole system functions. What I'd like to do now is talk about those boards and commissions, how they actually come into being. Generally, the boards and commissions fall into a few major categories, and some of the boards and commissions actually cross over. But the first primary category are those boards and commissions that might be legislatively mandated. In Michigan, any full-service city or home rule local jurisdiction must, for instance, have a planning commission. They must have a zoning board of appeals. Because of the way our retirement system functions, we have to have a police and fire retirement board. So those groups that are legislatively mandated have functions and authorities that are specifically spelled out in the legislation. The legislation tells us, for instance, that every city must have a master plan, and that master plan must be updated every 5 years. It tells us that the Zoning Board of Appeals has a judicial function, and the only people that can overturn a decision by the ZBA is the district court. The City Commission, for instance, cannot overturn a decision by the ZBA. There are another group of boards that our volunteers sit on, and those are generally referred to as quasi-public corporations. They're not required to exist by state law, but if a city has them, they operate under the authority of that law. Those boards are things like the Economic Development Corporation, the Tax Increment Finance Authorities, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, the Local District Finance Authority. They are created by a city, but they're empowered and regulated by the state law under which they were formed. They can, unlike any other board that we're talking about, they actually have some authority to receive funds, create plans around those funds, and recommend budgets around those funds. There are some other boards that are mandated specifically by ordinance or by charter that are unique to this city, but you will often find them replicated in others. For instance, the Parks and Recreation Commission was mandated in the original charter. The Mount Pleasant Historic District Commission was created by ordinance. The Building Authority was created by ordinance. These kinds of groups that you may sit on have their functions spelled out in the ordinance or the charter by which they were created. They most often are strictly advisory. They advise the commission or the responsible professional staff, depending on the language, as a citizen advocate kind of board. The Parks and Recreation Commission, for instance, is expected to advocate for parks and recreation and support those missions and help the professional parks and recreation folks bring ideas to the table and think things through. They are also, that board in particular, sends recommendations to the City Commission about a master plan and about a fee structure. There are another group of committees that we would probably refer to often as ad hoc committees or committees that were put together by a simple resolution of the City Commission. Mayor Ling, for instance, chaired an ad hoc committee that the City Commission put together a couple of years ago to study the use of fluoride in the water. Their job was to take a specific question and advise the City Commission about what to do. Another board that was created by simple resolution is the Airport Advisory Board. The Airport Advisory Board is assumed to be a group of citizen advocates who advise the Director of Public Works and in turn pass recommendations onto the City Commission as to those issues that are important to the health and safety of the airport. Regardless of whether a board's authority comes from state law or from the charter, every member is expected to read and review reports that are given to them. They are to run an orderly and open meeting under the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. And as I said, Jeremy's going to talk to you more about how to run a meeting. They're required to behave in an ethical and professional manner. And Mrs. Ling is going to talk to you more about that. And they are expected to receive input from the public and provide feedback to the staff liaison who works with them. Volunteer boards, however, never have authority to make promises or commitments to a member of the public as an individual. So no member of the Planning Commission, for instance, should deal with an individual member of the community or the citizenry and make any promise for what might happen at a meeting. No individual member has any authority. Boards have no authority over hiring, terminating, supervising, or directing work of the staff. That authority rests only with the city manager under this charter. And except where it's specifically authorized by state law, boards cannot assume the work of the city commission. We talked about the city commission's authority, and only they have authority to pass ordinance or create regulatory standards. No board and commission can pass final judgment on regulatory rules, processes, or ordinances. No board or commission can execute a contract. They can make recommendations sometimes depending on their area of authority, but only the city commission can contract for something. Only the city commission can approve budgets. No board or commission has budget authority in this system. They cannot set fees. They may be able to take input from the public and recommend fees to the city commission, but only the city commission can set fees. And they cannot collect revenue. There are some boards, remember I said, that have the right to capture, but they're allowed to do that under a specific state law. The volunteer boards and commissions that are a part of this city organization, regardless of all that other stuff, are a critical part of the feedback loop between the citizen, the staff, and the city commission. And every one of them adds to the foundation that makes Mount Pleasant successful. So once again, thank you very much for being here and sharing this evening with us. What I'd like to do now is introduce Mayor Ling, who will talk to you about the city's ethics policy.
As you can see, I'm not a technology person. Thanks for being here. I'm Kathy Ling, the mayor, as Ms. Grinzinger said. I very much appreciate people being willing to come out on any night, certainly on this cold night, and also on Martin Luther King Day. Originally, we thought, we weren't even thinking of that day when we thought, oh, the third Monday in January would be a good time to do that. The City Commission meets on the second and the fourth Monday, so that's early in the year, so we'll do it on the third Monday. Nobody gave any thought whatsoever to the fact that it was Martin Luther King Day. Of course, the building was closed. I'm sure the staff was thrilled to know that they were going to be here, not only working during the day, but at night. So we might reconsider that next year. However, it did occur to me that actually, in some ways, it's a very, very appropriate day to have it. Because if you've been listening to any of the discussion of both the President's Inaugural and Martin Luther King Day, there's been a lot of discussion about service, a day of service. Saturday was a day of service, and some places Monday was a day of service, because that's what Dr. King was about, was providing service. That's what you're doing, partly by coming here this evening on this cold night, but by being on these boards. That is a very important way in which citizens serve the community. So in that sense, it really is a very appropriate day to have you here. I am going to talk about the Code of Ethics. I wanted to just briefly mention that in reference to the city manager's comments about the role of the boards and commissions, many of the boards and commissions are advisory. That's not to suggest that they don't have a very, very important role, and I'm sure that the city manager wasn't trying to suggest that. That advice is critical. The city commission deals with so many issues, like the airport, for example. I can assure you that as a member of the City Commission, I like to try to know about things, but in no way am I an expert on the airport, and that's why it's important to have. Same thing with the Historical District Commission. It's really helpful to have people that are focusing on that area and are able to then share that expertise with the commission, so it is a very, very important role that the advisory boards play. And we do have a hard time sometimes getting people to apply, and I thought I would mention to this active group of people who were willing to apply to be on a board and therefore might know other people who would be willing to apply to boards. Despite the fact that we've made quite a few appointments in the last couple of months, we still do have some critical appointments that have just become, in some cases, open. We're going to have an opening on the Zoning Board of Appeals, on the Planning Commission, on the Parks and Recreation Commission. We've been trying for several months to find someone to serve on the Fire and Police Pension Board, which does oversee some very important decisions relating to fire and police pension, and a board that is referred to as the, I may not even get all of it, Building, Fire, and Sanitary Sewer Board of Appeals, which doesn't meet a lot, but which sometimes needs to make important decisions that affect people's buildings. So if you happen to know people who would like to serve, we're looking for people to be on those boards. All right, having said that, and keeping my eye on the clock because we want to get you out of here early, I'm going to finally, and I apologize to the city manager, I didn't realize that was going to be up, and I hope it wasn't distracting people as she was speaking. I'm talking about ethics. When I talk government, we would spend several days sometimes talking about the ethics of being a citizen. What did that mean? What are ethics? Right or wrong? Ethics is about doing the right thing. Seems simple enough, but obviously there can be a lot of disagreement about what is the right thing, and that's my introduction is sort of, okay, ethics, doing the right thing, what is right? Generally we say laws or moral tenets determine right or wrong, and there's some basic overlap between moral, religious tenets and law that, generally speaking, citizens agree to. Thou shalt not kill. And yet, we engage in wars, and there's the concept of a justified war. Self-defense is a reason why sometimes people will kill and then are able to argue in court that it was self-defense. We're engaged in this country right now about a big debate. I'm not going to start that debate tonight over the use of drones. And is that moral or not? Is it ethical? Should we be doing it or not? I might have a very strong opinion about it, but we won't go there tonight. Thou shalt not steal. How many of you have seen Les Mis? I haven't seen it yet, but you know that a lot of that is about the stealing of a loaf of bread. And was that right or wrong? And how much punishment should be associated with stealing a loaf of bread. Anybody ever see the movie Murder in the First? It's about somebody who stole something for his family during the Depression. They were starving. He stole, I think it was a loaf of bread actually, from a store that happened to be part of a post office. And because it was part of a post office, it was a federal crime. And he ended up going to, I think it was Alcatraz, and then was involved in a murder at Alcatraz. I mean, it really mushroomed out. And it's based on a true story that actually changed the whole way in which the American prison system is handled. But it was over the stealing of food. Medicine to save a child, there's a classical ethical problem that's dealing with what if somebody is dying. It costs $1,000 to buy the medicine. You don't have $1,000. Should you steal the medicine? Is it ethical or not ethical? So, and then honor thy father and mother. All of those of us who are parents probably read the story about this incredible family of youngsters who I think were 14 and 8 and 2 that were in the house when this woman who was kidnapped jumped out of the car and ran to the house and knocked on the door and asked to be let in, and they undoubtedly saved her life. How many of us have parents, as parents, who have left our children by themselves for a short time have said, and under no circumstances should you let anybody in that you don't know? And in fact, what made me think about that was I read an article where the father had said that's what he always told his kids. And yet he was very proud of the fact that they had saved this woman's life. And the last one, tell the truth. We just had Christmas. How many of you honestly responded to everybody about what you thought about what they gave you? Those are just examples of that say it isn't always that easy to know what's right and wrong. And that's why the city was looking at developing a code of ethics in order to be able to try to say to people, well, at least in terms of being on a board and commission in Mount Pleasant, these are the kinds of things that the commission has said are the kinds of things that you should be doing if you're a member of a commission. Let's see if I can. The history of the code, people have been talking about having a code of ethics for a long time. I do know that when Bruce Kilmer, who just left the board, ran, one of the issues that he ran on was that we needed to have a code of ethics. That was in 2006. In 2009, actually, a planning commission generated a new discussion on this and developed a draft that they sent to the commission, which we then referred to the attorney, and of course, being an attorney, he spent a lot of time redoing that draft. I came back to the commission. The first draft of that was presented to the commission in April of 2010, and it was not ultimately passed until January of 2011. Among other things, it was sent to all the boards and commissions, and they were asked to give input, and we did make some changes, and in fact, the Planning Commission was very responsible for some of the changes that we made. We've tried to follow these principles to have it as short and clear as possible. There are enormous differences in the codes of ethics that exist among the different cities, and we wanted to try to make it readable. One of the members of the Planning Commission said it should say nothing but be ethical, but that seemed a little short. Appropriate for a community of our size and circumstances. The Michigan Municipal League has a whole handbook on how to write a code of ethics. They don't have a sample code of ethics because their position is you can't really have a sample code of ethics. It really depends on your community. Large communities are different than small communities. In a large community, you might have a much broader list of you can't vote on all of these things. If you've ever met anybody, seen them in the store, whatever. In a smaller community, if you had a code of ethics that was too limiting in terms of when you could vote and when you couldn't, nobody might ever be able to vote on anything. So you do have to adapt it a little bit to your circumstances. And then we wanted it to be fair. There is what are called the motivational or aspirational codes, trying to encourage people to think about whether they have a conflict of interest or if they should vote. Versus the very punitive that say, we're going to get you, if you're not following the law. We didn't want to do either of those, really. We were trying to do something that would encourage ethical behavior, but was not a tool to say, we caught you on this one. So that's what we were trying to accomplish. When I used to teach government, and we talked about civic virtue, which is sort of about doing the right thing, the classic Roman definition was putting the common good above your own individual interests. And what I find very interesting about that is that was the Romans back about 2,000 years ago. In the Iroquois Confederacy Constitution, you will find an almost identical phrase, which is, in all your official acts, self-interest shall be thrown into oblivion, which is one of my favorite ways of putting it. Why a city code of ethics? It helps ensures accountability to the electorate, so that the people who voted the city commission in, who then appoint the boards and commissions, know what's going on and that people are doing the right thing. Helps ensure officials advance common interest, not their own interest. And a local policy can more clearly define required and prohibited behavior. It tells you what's required and what is prohibited. Includes a process to ensure fairness for the affected official and the public, provides sanctions to motivate compliance, and reflects unique local concerns. So those were the principles that we were using as we were trying to pass a code of ethics. This is the code of ethics that I'm going to pass out. Do you want to have a copy, Chairman? Okay. We can pass one to the person behind you. Yeah, there's 3 here.
Want me to help you finish?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, everybody got a copy? We are not going to sit here and read through the whole code of ethics. Although, as a commission, you can't believe that. I brought this just to, if you went through this, you would find about 7 versions of the code of ethics, plus some drafts and part of the handbook from the Municipal League. We went through it a lot of times. You can read, and I don't want to have us spend the whole evening looking through the Code of Ethics. In fact, I just want to take a couple of more minutes. What I would like to do is to highlight what I think are the key parts of the Code of Ethics, and then ask you when you get a chance to take a look at it. If you look at number 2, purpose, it says that Mount Pleasant city leaders are to advance common interests rather than their own interests and are to be wholly accountable to the people. This policy does not comprehensively define ethical behavior, but instead defines minimal enforceable ethical standards for city leaders. In other words, it just, obviously you can't define every single situation. Part of what we were trying to do was to allow for discretion on the part of individuals. But it does say these are the minimum standards that we're trying to follow. If you look down on the definitions, again, we're not going to talk about what's the definition of mayor, city manager, that kind of thing, but I would like to draw your attention to 2 important definitions on the front page. The first is confidential information. That is very critical, and I'm sure that when you meet with the individual staff people, or for those of you who've been doing this for a while, when you've met with them, they've talked about confidential information. Confidential information, generally speaking, is talking about information you get when you go into closed session, and that the open meetings law says can be provided in closed session and is confidential. And that means until it's been officially made public, you can't talk about it outside the group that you are a part of. So it says confidential information means information, whatever form obtained by an official during the course of his or her service to the city, that is not available to or may be exempted from disclosure to members of the general public under the Freedom of Information Act or another applicable law, rule, regulation, or court order. And you're not supposed to benefit from it, take advantage of it. It's kind of like insider information on stocks. If you have insider information, it's illegal to take advantage of that insider information. And the same thing is true when you're dealing with confidential information as a member of a board. You can't spread it to the public, and you're not supposed to get an advantage from it. Conflict of interest, of course, is the key to a code of ethics in many cases dealing with boards and commissions. And we spent many hours discussing what is conflict of interest, and this was what we came up with. A decision to be made by the city body on which the official serves, or in the case of a city commissioner, a decision to be made by any city body which could result in private gain for the official, a member of the official's household, or a member of the official's immediate family residing outside the official's household. So the key things here are, it can't be for private gain. You're not getting some private gain from it, not available to other people in the community. And it defines household. And household, it's anyone who, what it defines as family, which is your household or a member of the official's immediate family residing outside the official's household. Now, there's other places where that's more specifically defined. If you look on the second page, there is the definition of private gain. If you look down in your alphabetical, if you look down, you'll see private gain. Private gain says, private gain means any direct financial benefit that is different than any financial benefit members of the general public or a significant group of the general public would gain in similar circumstances. And there's a footnote on that, and normally footnotes aren't all that important, but in this case, the footnote is really the essence of what this is about, because what it says is you can't have private gain. It defines private gain as financial benefit. And then it says, here's how you know the difference between what is your individual private benefit. You've somehow benefited from it differently than other people have benefited from it. And that's what the footnote talks about. So if you look at the footnote at the bottom, it says, gain that is or could be realized by the city is not private gain because it inures to the benefit of the general public that the city serves. Gain that is or could be realized by a group, such as businesses in a certain area, also is not private gain. There's also no private gain or conflict of interest where state law requires that a board be comprised at least in part of the representatives of businesses, neighborhoods, entities, or areas. However, if a particular decision or action would affect a single individual, family, or business, private gain may result, which is, you know, a lot of legal words. But this is, what it means is this. Let's say, for example, the city is going to put in a bike path, and you are an avid cyclist, and you think, well, you know, I'm going to be one of the primary users of this bike path. I'm going to gain from this. Well, so is everybody else in the city that rides a bike. You're not gaining anything individual. Everybody who is a cyclist is going to gain from that, and therefore that is not private gain. Now, you know, if you had an ordinance that said, and the only bikes that can be ridden on this bike path are the ones that are owned by, say, Motorless Motion, for example, and you're the owner of Motorless Motion, obviously we would never pass something like that anyway, but that would be a private gain. You're going to benefit from that. The tax districts are spending money. The Mission Street maybe putting in sidewalks or fences or encouraging people to make it look better in order to encourage customers, but that's benefiting everybody who lives on Mission and the whole community. It's not benefiting any individual owner. So it's just, it's a particular benefit that you're getting that is different than other people in that same group are getting. And that's the essence of the definition of conflict of interest. Going back to the first page, B says a decision to be made by a city body on which the official serves could result in private gain for, 1, anyone the official represents as an attorney, accountant, or other professional; 2, an entity for which the official serves as an officer, director, or for a limited liability company or partnership; 3, unless the interest is held in a manner so that the official does not directly control the number of shares, portion of the ownership interest, or its value, an entity in which the official either owns more than 10% of the total stock or other ownership interest in the entity, or has an interest totaling $50,000 more in value. And subsection 1 does not apply to an attorney, accountant, or other professional whose client is only a lender on the project. That's a good example of where we had to make it more specific to a smaller town. Because if it were broader than that, nobody who works for a bank would be likely to be able to be on the Planning Commission. That was one of the suggestions the Planning Commission made. If you look at, the only other section that I'm going to look at tonight before I turn this over to Jeremy is the section that talks about standards. Because it, in addition to the conflict of interest, also summarizes what are the basic behaviors that we're talking about here. So on standards, one, compliance, an official shall comply. You'll follow the laws of the state and the city. So if you're on a plan, if you're a member of the Planning Commission, don't put something up that you haven't taken to get a site plan approved, for example, because you're supposed to be setting an example for other people. So compliance means you need to be complying with federal, state, and local laws. Two, confidential information we talked about. Three is representation. And that's part of what the city manager talked about, which is you can't represent yourself as being the city. As a member of the city commission, I can't speak for the city unless I've been authorized by the city commission to speak for the city. So you can't make any statements or answer any questions on behalf of the city without authorization. Number D says an official shall act within the authority granted to the board on which he serves and shall represent the roles of other officials and bodies. E, an official shall not interfere with the city's administrative functions or the duties of the city staff and shall not impair the city staff's ability to implement policy decisions made by an official body. You can't go into the planning office, for example, and say, I want to change, I don't want you to look at this site plan. I don't want you to do this job. You can't go up to the people who are on the work for the Department of Public Works and say, oh, I'd rather you worked on Maple Street rather than on Arnold Street today. You know, that's not the role of the members, and I'm sure nobody here would do that, but that's an example of what that's talking about. We talked about private gain. I'm just going to point out to you, and then you can look for it, you can read it on your own, the administration of it. And I'm just going to summarize it this way by saying the idea of this was to be a guide to people, to say, if you're on a board and you have concern about whether or not you should vote on something, whether or not there would be any gain, talk to the staff person. If you're on the Planning Commission, you can talk to Jeff Gray, our planning official, who probably will talk with the city manager. In fact, I think it says talk to the city manager. And just say, here's the situation that's coming up. What do you think? Now, you know, if it's your business that is about to ask for a special use permit, probably you aren't going to have to go talk to anybody about whether that's going to be all right or not. If you're 2 doors down from it and think maybe you're going to be affected by it, it's probably okay, but if you have a question about it, then that's the kind of situation this is talking about. If you're not sure, if you think it's kind of a gray area, just ask the staff person and the city manager about it. They'll ask you specifics and they'll give you some advice on whether it's okay or not okay. And then when the issue comes up, you just simply need to say, I want people to know this situation, and I asked for advice, and this is what they suggested that I do, so that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes there's a gray area where you know, you do have an obligation to vote when you're on boards and commissions, particularly if you're making a decision like the Zoning Board of Appeals. You don't get to abstain. You have to vote. Unless there's a conflict of interest, that's what the state law says, you have to vote. And so maybe you've got a conflict that isn't really written here, but you feel like it's a conflict. You just feel like, no, I'm not going to feel right voting on this. The other thing that this code says is that you can tell the commission, if you're on the Planning Commission, just tell the Planning Commission, here's why I don't think I feel comfortable voting on this. And they vote on it, on whether they think that it's okay for you to vote or not. And if they say it's okay for you not to vote, then you cannot vote. If they say, nope, sorry, that's not a conflict, then you do have to vote. So that's described in there, and then the penalties are described in there. And of course, nobody's surprised I talk longer than I should have. Sorry about that. Anyone have any questions on it? Feel free when you've read through it to ask the staff person that you work with if you have any questions about it. The next person on the program is the City Clerk, Jeremy Howard, who's going to be talking about parliamentary procedure. Thanks. Went way too long. Oh, sorry. I forgot it was even on. I shouldn't have forgotten that I was hitting it with the paper the whole time.
All right, I'm going to pull up my presentation here real quick. The slides that you're going to see are slightly different than what I'm going to speak about tonight. This is a very long and sometimes confusing topic, and I'm going to try to be short and somewhat understandable. So I'll do my best to do that. I'm not going to expand a lot on each of these slides. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through them, give you kind of a basis for how to think about parliamentary procedures, how to interact in meetings. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do that very quickly and be able to get you guys out of here and get home before it gets even colder. So parliamentary procedure in and of itself simply is just the formal procedures used by a deliberative assembly to present and discuss possible courses of action, make decisions, and keep order. It's based on the rules of democracy. There's commonly accepted ways in which groups of people come together and conduct their business. That's all we're really talking about when we say parliamentary procedure. There's lots of benefits for parliamentary procedure. Enhanced leadership credibility allows you as members of the board to have credibility when you are conducting your meetings and when people ask you questions. It should allow for faster and more efficient meetings, often cuts out a lot of the stuff that you don't need. It allows for prevention of legal or illegal actions, and it also helps for improved communication skills when you're conducting the meeting with each other. Basic principles of it. One, just being courteous to each other, having justice for all in the grandest sense of the word. Consideration of only one subject at a time. Oftentimes, if you're not following a certain set of rules, you can get into more than one subject. It gets confusing to the board members, confusing to the public. The rights of the absent members must be protected. That's one of the things that Robert's Rules was originally based on, was protecting the people that aren't there and don't have a voice so that they can still be heard. And then the two I think are maybe the most important things are that the ultimate goal is that the minority can be heard. So there always usually is a minority side to everything, that's heard. But in the end, the majority must prevail. So Robert's Rules allows you to do that, to be able to have both sides of that coin. Quorum, just real quickly. Most of the boards have some set of bylaws or standards. The commissions is called out in the charter in Article 2, Section 15E, what a quorum is. If you have a question on what your quorum is, you can see your staff liaison for exactly what your quorum is. City Commission is 4. Most of those are spelled out in some form of bylaws for each board. How to act at a meeting. One of the main things you want to do is just make sure that, especially if you're not in a place that has microphones and a speaker system and you do have public, speak clearly, speak loudly. Not only does the public need to hear you, but your members, other members on the board need to hear what you're saying so they can understand you and interact with you in that meeting. Oftentimes, most of the time you want to be recognized by the chair before you speak. That kind of keeps control of the meeting. The mayor or the chairperson, whoever it may be, can recognize you. Remain quiet while others are speaking. It's just kind of a common courtesy thing, but it is part of Robert's Rules. Only one person talking at a time. That helps avoid confusion in the meetings. Most of the time you want to address people by their titles. Mayor Ling, Commissioner whatever. First names, avoiding first names is always a good idea, and keeping it formal when you're in that type of situation. Discussions should be between the commission and the board members only. This often is an easily confused one. A lot of times boards, you'll see a lot of interaction between the public and the boards. We want to make sure that, according to Robert's Rules, the meeting is for the members of that board, for that commission. So there's a lot of dialogue in and amongst the members, but there are very specific times, which we'll get into in a little bit, that reference when the public can speak, and that is a one-way communication. Is not a debate time. The public can certainly have input into what you're saying, but it's not a time to debate. You'll usually hear the mayor of the commission say that, come on up, but now is not the time to debate. We'll hear what you have to say. Somebody can get back to you at a later time. And then if you must leave the room, generally it's polite and according to Robert's Rules to ask permission to do that. Cell phone procedures, this didn't used to be quite as big a deal. It's become kind of standard. Everybody has a cell phone pretty much in their pocket. Often meetings have laptops. The commissioners all sit at the dais with a laptop. So it becomes a temptation at the very minimum to use your cell phone, to text, to email, to do those type of things during a meeting. That is considered inappropriate. According to Robert's rules, that shouldn't be done. And the biggest issue with that is that when you do that, because it is an open meeting, those records all do become public records. So just remember the texts you send could technically be public records, and that usually helps people refrain from sending text messages and emails during a meeting. Agendas. Agendas set out how you want your meeting to run. Most boards and commissions have some form of agenda. Often those agendas are approved at the beginning of the meeting. Once they are approved, that is your agenda. That becomes owned by that group and is how you proceed throughout the meeting. City Commissions is actually set by ordinance, which can be reviewed and changed if need be. Each board probably has their own procedures for how they set their agenda. Standard order of business. This may look like your board if you've sat in on any meetings. This is kind of a generalization. I tried to make it a little bit general, still sticking to what we typically see. Normally you'll have some kind of call to order by the chairperson or the mayor, and then you'll have, oftentimes a Pledge of Allegiance or something to that nature. A roll call of who is there, who's absent, usually done either by staff liaison, clerk, whoever normally does that. Oftentimes then is proclamations and presentations, time for handing out a presentation for MLK Day or whatever presentation may be or proclamation may be on the agenda at that time. Normally then the agenda is approved, quick and easy, often done by unanimous consent, which I'll briefly touch on in a little bit. Public input then, most meetings will have a public input section at the beginning and the end. Typically the beginning ones are for the board to allow feedback from the public on items on the agenda. So if they're coming up and want to speak to a specific item you're speaking on the agenda, that's a good time to do that so that you can have that information as you proceed through the agenda. Receipt of petitions, communications. Again, you may or may not have this in your set of agendas, but it just is a space to allow for any reports or anything that needs to come from staff related back to the specific board that you're sitting on. Oftentimes you'll have a public hearing section, sometimes required. Many boards require public hearings for whatever reason, required by charter, required by state law. There's often a spot on the agenda for that. And then it goes by a lot of different names, staff recommendations, new business, old business, tabled business. There's all kinds of different ways to say it, but basically the action items that you want to be talking about that night. After the action items are completed, you typically will have some form of announcements where the members, not the public necessarily, but the members of that board can then share with each other any announcements that they have, share with the public any announcements that they have. And then again, another time for the public, gives them a second opportunity to come back up. Maybe they heard something that they wanted to comment on, and then they can come back up and do that on anything that they feel the need to come up and discuss. Again, one-way street, let them speak to you, and then just say, thank you for that, we'll consider that. Somebody may get back to you, whatever reference you need to make in that form. From there, this section could be a lot of things. You could have a recess, you could go straight to adjournment from there, you could have a work session, you could have a closed session, just depending on what's going on with your particular board at that specific time. That end section could have any one or all or none of those things happen. Motions. I'm going to kind of go through what it means to deal with motions, seconding and debating motions and voting. There's kind of 8 steps in the process. I'm just going to go through real quick. Step 1, often a member requests the floor and addresses the mayor, chairperson, asks for that, gets their attention somehow, raising a hand, use your voice. Each board kind of has their own preferences on how that's done. Typically is relatively formal. Mr., Madam, Mayor, whatever formality you use in your board. And then step 2, the mayor or the chair usually recognizes that person by either acknowledging them by name or just by kind of nodding at them, letting them know that it's okay for them to take the floor. The member states their motion oftentimes in the form of, I move that, and then whatever that is. It may be in the form of a resolution or an ordinance for the commission. It may be your board doesn't do motions if it's just an advisory board. So just depends on the type of board, but that's typically how a motion is made. Step 4, there's then a necessity of a second member chiming in with a second, often done again by raising a hand, by saying I second, and then acknowledged by the chairperson or the mayor at that point, whoever's running the meeting. And step 5, the chair then has a motion, has a second, has a motion, and usually, if need be, we'll repeat back, I have a motion made by person X, seconded by person X to do X. It can be repeated, doesn't necessarily have to be repeated. It's not a bad idea to repeat it because then you make sure that the entire board is all on the same page with what it is you're discussing. Once that's known to everybody, then that's the time for discussion. Only when you have a motion seconded and on the floor is it appropriate to begin discussion on that motion. 6, members have the right to get recognition and debate on that motion once it's there and owned by that group. Debate can take 10 seconds or it can take 10 hours. It's up to the board who is debating a certain topic. There's a lot of things that can happen during that debate, a lot of different types of motions. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'll talk about a couple ones quickly here in a couple slides, amending, referring, postponing. There's a lot of different things that can be done once that is started to be debated. Step 7, the chair puts the question to a vote. Typically, as recommended by Robert's Rules, that's usually done by an aye and a no vote. So all those in favor say aye, all those opposed say no. And most of the time, it can be decided very quickly by the chair or the clerk or whoever is noting that, whether that motion passes or not. One interesting fact to note, though, that oftentimes people will not vote. Not voting is fine. Maybe not recommended by Robert's Rules, but it does happen. But a silent vote is a yes vote. So silent vote does not mean abstaining. Silent vote means you're voting yes, whether you're saying it or not. So silence gives consent. Once that happens, the chair announces the result of the vote. Usually very simply, the affirmative has been, the motion is adopted. Most motions are done in the positive, so you don't see a lot of negative motions. Most of the time people try to make motions in the positive. So then once that has been stated by the chairperson, mayor, the next item on the agenda is up for debate after a motion and second. These are some of the types of motions. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these. Main motion is the main motion that brings that piece of business up to the forefront, and it is the next item on the agenda, allows it to be debated on in front of the, or amongst the board members themselves. Subsidiary motions, like I said before, things like amend are the types of motions that can affect those specific main motions. There's also privilege motions, incidental motions, a little bit more on amending. An amending motion is something that quite often will happen once you get into debate. Oftentimes something will come up where somebody will say, well, I think this should say this instead, or can we change the date to this on that motion? So with a simple amend motion, that allows you to, with that board, to be able to make those changes very simply. They're proposed, they take a motion in a second just like any other motion, and then once that passes, you now have to go back to your other one, to your main motion as amended, and vote on that motion. Motion to postpone is another one that's commonly used. There's a lot of times it's called tabling, although there is no such thing in Robert's Rule called tabling. It actually is to postpone. It just temporarily suspends an action on the item. You can suspend it to a time or postpone it to a time or a date, or you can even say, I postpone until we can get further information on this study for an action to take place. Again, you can read through these. You've got some other slides in your presentation than what I'm even going through here. If you have further questions on them, I can certainly try to answer those questions, but to save some time, we'll keep on going. Postpone indefinitely, another one that comes up occasionally. It's a very simple way for a board or commission to basically say, we don't ever want to talk about this again. So if you postpone it indefinitely, basically means we're not going to vote on this, and it probably is never going to come up again. If you want to talk about it again, don't postpone it indefinitely. Motions to reconsider happens when a mistake is made, or someone just changes their mind, very simply. You can have a motion to reconsider if something passes and then they say, oh man, I kind of changed my mind on that. It has to be done by the prevailing side, which doesn't always necessarily have to be the majority. If you need a 2/3 vote and the noes win on a 2/3 vote, they are actually the prevailing side. Only the prevailing side can call for that, so that you couldn't have somebody continually saying motion to reconsider, motion to reconsider. Limits to extending debate. You can suspend rules if need be. Roll call voting. Votes are often done by voice. A lot of boards do use voice votes, but there are other boards that actually use roll call votes, and someone will actually read off each member's name and have them vote a voice vote at that time. You can vote for it, you can vote against it, or you can abstain from that vote. But like Mayor Ling said, there are only very specific reasons that you can abstain from something, and only in very specific, distinct cases of conflict of interest is typically when somebody abstains. It's not just because on a whim you decide you don't want to vote on something, you can't abstain just for that reason. Unanimous consent is another type of voting that often occurs, saves time. A lot of times, maybe the agenda might be something that you can vote on by unanimous consent. The chairperson can say, does everybody agree on this? The agenda looks good for everybody. Everybody acknowledges, yep, looks good to me. You can say, it's moved by unanimous consent. But if one member objects, it does require you to go through the whole process of getting a motion, a second, debating, approval, the whole piece. So it's an easy way to do it if everybody agrees. There are tons of information out there on Robert's Rules of Order. These are just a couple, 5 or so of the books that I have up in my office. I have not read it cover to cover, but I do refer to it fairly frequently when questions come up. It's pretty good about doing that, giving some information, and there's some abridged guides, official abridged guides even, that can simplify it. The CD-ROM actually is what I find myself using the most if anybody really wants it. I recommend that. Go out, get the CD-ROM, it's searchable, keyword, and makes it much easier. And then there's some online websites if you want to check out those as well. That was all I had.